Welcome to the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals Videogram on post-traumatic stress disorder, part 1. And in part 1, we're going to look at PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder and look at more what it is, the symptoms of it. In part 2, we'll look more into the healing process and how to recover from PTSD itself. PTSD, though, or post-traumatic stress syndrome, is something where a stressor that is experienced by a human being is so severe and the individual's coping abilities are somewhat already minimized. The stressor is so severe that it imprints, so horrific, it imprints upon the brain. And the brain is unable to process this mental material into long-term memory storage itself. So the process of taking in memory, or what we refer to as associated mental material, is prevented due to the horrific nature. It doesn't permeate into the necessary storage facility within the brain long-term wise. Instead, it stays more in the front as an unprocessed mental image. It's fragmented in many ways. It's dissociative mental material. And this causes a wide variety of problems due to the horrific nature of the event, the emotional inability to understand or to process the loss or the trauma. And when trauma is not properly processed, when trauma is not properly compartmentalized in your brain, when trauma is allowed to be fragmented and not stored, then an individual has to come to grips with it and integrate it into their life story. But if it's not integrated, if it's not processed even, because integration is the final stage, but if it isn't processed, then it's going to leave emotional wounds that are still bleeding and not able to scar properly. So there's 3 types of stressors or horrific events that can occur, which can possibly create PTSD within an individual. Now, remember, not all individuals who incur or experience horrible events end up with PTSD. It's still horrible and they have to integrate it, but they're able to integrate it. And this might be due to their own coping abilities, might be due to their structure at home. They might have more support, or it might be due that they've never been victimized before. Individuals who've been victimized before at some horrific level are more weakened and susceptible to PTSD in the future. So intentional human acts of evil are one of the first categories that one can find in PTSD. And this would include rape, murder, anything that happens in war, kidnapping, if you're tortured, if an individual experiences a robbery, terrorism. So they're just horrible things that can happen to a person due to the hands of another person. And it's very hard to understand sometimes the face of evil itself. And because of this, intentional human acts of evil are the hardest for individuals to process, to overcome, because one is always left with the question, why? Now, unintentional human acts can also cause problems. If you're in a very bad car crash, a train wreck, plane crash, and you happen to survive, a building collapsing, These are types of events that aren't intended, but they occur due to human activity, and they can cause PTSD as well. Now, acts of nature also occur: storms, earthquakes, disease itself. And these are all things that can also leave an individual very traumatized when one looks at the expanse of damage due to an earthquake or a tsunami or a volcanic eruption, whatever it might be. Could be tornadoes, leveling, destroying someone's whole house, the whole town itself. So these types of events are hard to process, obviously. And because of that, PTSD can occur. Now, when assessing PTSD, there's a multitude of symptoms, and it can also be acute, chronic, or delayed. Now, to have PTSD, it usually is something that is longer than a month. So this would be an acute case of PTSD, or it would have to be chronic, which means it is lasting more than a month, 6 months or more. And in some cases, it can be delayed after the event. A few months later, an individual starts to experience the PTSD. So there's physical symptoms of it: lack of sleep, digestive stress itself, chronic pain, high blood pressure, migraines. Most common that individuals spotlight are intrusive thoughts that you cannot control, dreams that haunt you, and in some cases, even hallucinations, loss of time, and so forth. And these things are triggered through our sight, our taste, our touch, pressure, the sound of something, the smell, a place, a particular time of day. And because the high amount of stress is fragmented, it's dissociated mental material, it hasn't been associated with long-term memory yet. It might just take one of something to trigger a hallucination or an intrusive thought. So an individual who fought in the Vietnam War or the Iraq War or the war on terror in Afghanistan, maybe dry air from the sand or maybe a more jungle atmosphere can bring them back to that traumatic event that hasn't been processed. Or it could just simply be the sound of a firecracker or a gun being fired, a pistol being fired. For a woman who may have been raped, might be a certain scent of a cologne or aftershave. Just that one little bit or a combination of something can set that off. Maybe if someone was robbed in a park, that trigger would be let off anytime they go near a park area. So there's a lot of things that can trigger this disassociated mental material itself. Emotionally, due to all of this, obviously, individuals become very irritable, lack of concentration, and memory sometimes of the actual event itself. In response to this, many become very hypervigilant. They feel vulnerable, so they always anticipate the worst, paranoid, scanning, looking over their shoulder, and always an exaggerated response to a stressor that isn't near as dangerous as what they initially experienced itself. Because of this, individuals look to numb the pain through avoidance of particular people, places, or things, or thoughts. And sometimes this numbing, this psychic numbing, they look for addictive substances to try to hide the pain itself. Two of the most common symptoms of PTSD are anxiety and dissociation. First, anxiety itself is a persistent feeling that the stressor is still present, but it's no longer there. So the brain has become oversensitized to the event. It's unable to process it into long-term memory. And because of that, there is this constant feel of dread, uneasiness, nervousness. And that's what we refer to as anxiety. Anxiety is the absence of the stressor, but you still feel, in many cases, that fight or flight response. And because of that, physically, it's putting your body on red alert. So you're going to have the tension, the fatigue, the trembling, the migraines, and be more prone to panic attacks. Mentally, there's the confusion, the trouble with decisions, the hard to concentrate. And emotionally, anxiety can make anyone very irritable, fearful, and also a loss of confidence and a deep despair that there is no way out anymore. So it's very shattering in regards to worldview and what has occurred. Now, in addition to anxiety, PTSD victims suffer from what we call dissociation. And because trauma is so severe, avoidance is a natural reaction. And not all dissociation is bad or pathological. In many ways, some dissociation is a natural defense to keep the mind away from what's occurring, to black out from such an event that is so horrible. So there are certain things that the body will do to avoid that. And an example would be, even in nature, maybe an antelope that has been run down by a predator and they're in the jaws of death. Something just shuts off because it's such a horrible event itself. So there is a disassociation within humanity as well, the human species, in ways that our body and mind can shut down from a severe trauma itself. Now, that can be good in the immediate, but there are cases where it can be not so good, and it can also become long-term pathological and prevent an individual from actually healing from PTSD. So with the trauma, there are, as I mentioned before, associated mental material and disassociated mental material. And the disassociated mental material is unable to find processing within the brain itself. It's very highly emotional, it's fragmented, and it's not walled off to our immediate emotions and reactions. It's primarily also, it's nonverbal. It's an emotional reaction. And that's why these triggers that set off an hallucination or an intrusive thought are tied to our senses or other things that are very nonverbal. Just the most slightest change of temperature or a particular place can trigger the trauma itself. Now, individuals can disassociate from trauma through a variety of ways itself. Now, those, before we go into that, who are suffering from a trauma are usually very much out of touch with their surroundings. And there's a list here of things to look for: blank stares, downward stares, not being in the present, memory lapse, inattention, withdrawal itself, eyes moving erratically, someone who's very numb with their emotions, slow to respond. So there's a variety of physical signs that someone is experiencing trauma. But when an individual looks to disassociate from it, there are a few things that the body does. Depersonalization and derealization are two ways the body can respond to something. Many individuals women especially, who've been raped, sometimes depersonalize from the event. They almost feel like they're watching the event. It's almost like they break away from themselves, their mind, and they say that they see it maybe from the ceiling. They're looking down. It's just such a horrible event that they want to escape it. And in doing so, there is a split in regards to them not experiencing it so much, but watching it. Derealization is a little bit worse than that because it's a denial. The individual who dealt with this particular trauma is more wanting to believe for their own mental health in their own mind that it was a dream or it really didn't happen because it was such a horrific event. They're unable to process that it did occur, that it was a real event. So you can imagine if one of the requirements for healing from PTSD is facing it, processing it, and then incorporating it, the horrific event, into your life and learning from it. Well, derealization would really derail this. Flashbacks and amnesia or other types of forms of dissociation. The individual sometimes won't remember what occurred because the brain wants to shut it down and not remember all of the details itself. And then we have dissociation disorder itself, where a new personality can be created. So a lot of individuals who have multiple personality disorder, dissociation disorder, they can stem it back to their early childhood where something horrible happened. Maybe it was incest. Maybe it was a horrific event of seeing someone murdered. And when you see these things, they make an imprint, a death imprint. And it's very difficult to move forward. So some individuals who might have felt they were too weak, they will find somebody who's stronger. And if they have to create something that is stronger, then they will. Or they don't want to be the victim. They want someone else. So the mind actually creates a whole nother personality to disassociate from the trauma itself. Now, associated with all of this horrible, horrible things that individuals go through, there are a variety of other emotional and mental and physical things that they go through. One of them is called survivor guilt. And with survivor guilt, an individual from the death imprint is so upset about what occurred that they feel maybe they didn't deserve to live. Maybe in battle, their friend died, a fellow soldier died, and they didn't. And maybe they feel they weren't heroic enough, and they'll start to relive it through recrimination. And there will be this severe survivor guilt itself. Now, this can go into a variety of ways within their own behavioral changes themselves. Individuals might look to overcompensate for what occurred. So they will try to be really good in something else in life and be the best at it to try to shadow what went wrong. Or there could be a repetitious compulsion where they want to relive it. So they'll go and try to act it out somewhere to try to regain honor. Or they'll actually go into a career that mimics what occurred. So a lot of soldiers might go into law enforcement, or if it was due to a fire, a firefighter. So they look to try to find some way to resolve what occurred, to deal with the guilt itself. Others are very impulsive and they make sudden changes just to escape. And this impulsion can lead to bad financial decisions, bad relationship decisions, and so forth. Others have a very shattered worldview. If something horrific really happens to you, you might begin to question the goodness of God in your life. Why did it happen to me? This is impossible. It's something so bad can happen, or something so evil could occur. So a lot of individuals, they experience death anxiety, existential questions, a loss of their faith or their religion, and they really can become very hopeless and also depressed. Now, another way individuals look to escape the grips of PTSD is through addiction, drugs, but not just substances, but also other addictive behaviors such as sex, maybe gambling. Many individuals who experienced sexual abuse at a young age also become sexual because they start living out what occurred again and doing it and trying to understand it at some pathological level. And they're using the sex in such a way, maybe to try to find worth or maybe to perpetrate what they feel on others. Self-mutilation is another way individuals who suffer from PTSD may try to express themselves because they can't express themselves verbally, or it's the only thing that they have control over in life, or maybe they're looking for the pain, and the pain itself distracts them from what they're dealing with as it is. So all of these dark behaviors, the addiction, the substance abuse, the sexual promiscuity, the self-mutilation, or any of the radical behavioral changes, it's all about avoidance when it comes down to it, or an attempt to try to control the uncontrollable, numbing the pain and so forth. But it's not the proper way to process this non-associative mental material. It needs to be processed through acceptance, first of all. And that's why in therapy, when individuals look to overcome PTSD, that you work with support groups and a counselor, and you're pushed to face the reality, to grieve and actually incorporate the loss and allow it to become associative mental material in your long-term memory itself. And that's going to be primarily what we're going to discuss in part 2, PTSD and healing. And obviously it's a long road when dealing with something like this, but it is a completely achievable goal for an individual. It's just you have to get beyond a lot of the things that we mentioned previously, the dissociative behavior and so forth. If you'd like to learn more about our stress management certification that we offer here at AIHCP, we have the link right here, and excuse my head, it's in the way a little bit, but that's the link. Our phone number is 330-652-7776, and our email, which I'm in front of, is info@aihcp.org. Again, that's info@aihcp.org. Now, this course coincides with a topic we have in the stress management program, and that's SM580. And the resource book is the post-traumatic disorder source guide. And that is by a PhD by the name of Glenn. Let me move out of your way so you can get that. See if I can get out of the way. I don't think I can. But it is by Glenn Schiraldi. That's PhD. And he actually is the author. He actually is the author of the textbook. So this is the textbook that you would get for SM580. So I'd like to thank you for listening today, and I hope you have a good day. And I hope also that this video has helped enhance a little bit your understanding of PTSD.